Hey, what's going on? Coach Luka back here with Coach's Corner. Today what I'm going to cover is in-season training for basketball. This one just came up a lot, and I spent about 3 years with Bellevue High School coaching them, so I got, I would say, questions about this from DMs to emails to so on and so forth. And I think it's an important factor also too, because right now when I'm shooting this video, high school basketball season starts now. Again, this can be high school, college. This is more of, there's philosophies. I'll give examples and principles. I also want to give a shout out to Mike Robertson, my buddy that's got IFAS Basketball Insider. We've got a ton of information on this. Like, he's breaking it down like crazy. So make sure you check that out. You can Google it in, look at Mike Robertson, IFAS Basketball Insider. But I want to kind of go over, this will give you some frameworks and structure understanding of how to think about this, right? What we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to categorize athlete, right? Categorizing between how many minutes played as well as what type of athlete they are. And we're going to make this pretty simple and bucket that, right? From there, we're going to look at the types of training sessions that you're doing in season. From there, we're going to go like big picture, right? When we look at the season, because obviously if you're looking at, I've trained everything from high school, college to pros, and then pros are, NBA, you got 82 plus games per year, where EuroLeague is different. Not as many, but still like the frequency goes up, right? So you kind of got to go look at the big picture of the season. Are there breaks? Are there, weeks that there's more games, less games? We'll talk a little bit about that. And you combine that and you lay out the calendar, right? You kind of work backwards, starting with games. And then you plan individual sessions, and you got to understand, like, you got to be agile and adjust on the go. Any sports season, again, I've been the head strength and conditioning coach for rugby team, train with a lot of NFL guys. Like, you're going to always have to like make adjustments based on, especially if it's in season, right? Whether it's nagging aches and pains, injuries, crazy travel schedules, weeks where there's more games, so on and so forth. So just know that that's got to be kind of a staple in there as well. But the thing is too, like, today, when I was still playing basketball, strength and conditioning was not really a big part of it, to be honest with you, especially in season, right? There was even a belief that it will be to a detriment in your game, which is crazy, right? But why would you do it? Well, first of all, like, in off season, if you do the off season right, you built your performance up, whether it's building muscle, building strength, improving your connective tissue, getting more powerful, explosive, again, working on your conditioning, whatever that thing was that you wanted to improve physically as a player. Well, guess what? We want to maintain that. Right? If you built in an off season, like most players, then they don't do much during the season, and then their performance just drops. And you kind of get to the next off season, right back where you were or worse, right? So we want to maintain strength. We want to maintain muscle mass. We want to maintain connective tissue strength and resilience. It's not enough to just play games, right? And practice. We want to manage asymmetries. I mean, any sport is, you think about a baseball pitcher, obviously like extreme, but same thing in basketball. Like, usually most people jump more off of one leg, right? They're right-handed, whatever it may be. So we want to manage that. We're not going to necessarily, make everybody symmetrical. That's not going to happen, but we want to manage that. And we want to improve movement quality and feel good, right? When there's so much repetition in a certain sport, right? Like, you're going to bias towards certain movement patterns, which is going to create some issues. So we want to make sure we keep movement quality, feeling good. And what I was saying earlier, like, look, this looks very, very different in a high school season where you got 1 to 2 games a week, 20 to 25 a year. You got college, it's 2 times, you got 30 to 38 games a year. And then you go pro 3 to 4 times a week, 82 plus games a year. That's NBA. Again, EuroLeague, when I played for Himmick, you have basically games for, the national season. But then if you play in a ULEB Cup, a EuroLeague, so you're going to have extra games. So like, or you may have played ABA, like depending on which league you're in, you might have 2, even 3 games per week. Usually it's going to be like a 2, right? But again, that's going to be different, and we're going to kind of plan backwards. And so from there, first things first, you want to categorize athletes. You've probably seen this, if you ever watch sports where you go by minutes played, right? And you're going to have starters, that's your high minute players. And I'll give some NBA examples here too. You're going to have your rotational players, so moderate minutes, and you're going to have your bench, injury, and development players. So me, Mavs fan, obviously with Luka Doncic on the team, high minute player, right? You look at that starting 5, Kyrie, Luka, and then you're going to go, like, for example, and look at the rotations. That might be, Spencer DeWindy or whatever it may be, that's going to get 25 minutes per game. right? And then you have people that are really not getting a lot of minutes, injured or development. So, if we look at like what do we want? Well, we want to keep the starters, keep them on the court, keep them healthy, right? So the health end of the spectrum is the most important part for those. Reduce volume and weight load throughout that season, right? But again, we still want to stimulate, and we're going to still have days where we can develop depending on the breaks, but that's their main focus, right? We're going to load when appropriate. That's what I'm saying. Like, you're going to look at those blocks of time when they're kind of, they don't have as much games, and we're going to load them appropriately. For the rotation, we want to keep them on the court and we want to keep them ready. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to balance health and performance, right? We're going to be able to push the performance side of things a little bit more than we are with the starters. And we're going to keep normal volume in the weight room, right? Especially when we have those development days. And we're going to find time to load. Same thing as the starters, right? We're going to look at like pockets of time where we can actually load them a little bit more. Now, with the bench injury and development, we're going to prepare them for the future, right? The focus there is going to be on performance. This is similar to college and high school as well. Like, guys that weren't getting a lot of playing time, hey, you know what? We got a ton of opportunity now to get you stronger, build muscle. Like, I've had kids throughout the season that, put on muscle weight, got more explosive, certainly didn't lose any skills in their game because they were always practicing on that as well. But that's a great opportunity, right? So they're going to be training their movement foundation as well because they're development players. There may be body comp. Does somebody need to get leaner? Does somebody need to put on more muscle? Like, we're going to work on that. Again, if they're going to have a lot of playing time, we have an opportunity. And the thing is like, it's actually a big part of preparing them to get on the court, right? So that's the mentality on that side of things, is like, those guys is like, hey, like, you work hard in the in-season because you're not getting as many minutes. This is a great opportunity for you to get on the court as well. Okay, and then the second part of that, so we got our minutes played and we have movement strategies. And there's a lot of different things people will say here. I like to say static and dynamic proficient, think like more muscle dominant and or more fascial elastic dominant, right? So you can see, I think Bill Hartman calls it, gorilla and kangaroo, right? Gorilla is just like, again, more robust versus like kangaroos are just bouncy. And you actually see that, right? With static proficient athletes, they need deeper angles to produce force. So meaning, like, if you ask somebody to jump, right, that static proficient athlete is probably going to go like this, right? They might get really low, right, to try to explode out of that, right? And then also, again, to display power and force, they're going to need deeper angles. Second, it takes longer for them to get off the ground, right? You look at two guys standing next to each other, one's going to be, right? One's going to be, boom, going to be exploding up, right? But they're strong. Usually it's like they're going to be stronger. They're more be able to produce force, like more force, but just not faster. With dynamic proficient athlete, usually what you're going to see, and again, I'm bucketing this, there's some in-betweens as well. I was kind of like an in-between guy. And then you can develop, work on developing what you're going to develop. Be more dynamic decision with static proficient. So they have shallow angles, but they need more momentum to be explosive, right? So you're going to see them not go deep. Like, they're going to jump and not have a lot of depth when they jump, but quick to get off the ground, right? More elastic and more bouncy, right? So again, a great example would be, you see somebody and it's like they're wiry, they can't lift a lot of weight, but man, they can, like, they get a run up, they can get up there. But also, the way that we treat those athletes a lot of times, especially high school kind of development phases, you get the basically dynamic proficient athlete stronger is going to improve their performance, right? You get that static proficient athlete bouncier, right? You can improve their performance. Okay, and again, sometimes you're going to see that in between. But this is going to be important when we categorize as we go into this part. But I want to look at like the 4 types of training session. Again, putting this into kind of buckets helps, right? We got a recovery training session. This is really to reduce stiffness, soreness, and just improve it, I would say recovery. And that's usually going to be after the game. Most of the time, we're going to have like, you have the game, the next day is going to be recovery day. Get people feeling better, moving better. Again, getting them out of soreness and just feeling better in total. So that's going to be stuff like mobility flow, stretching, movement-based circuit. I'll show you guys an example in a little bit. Cyclical flushing, which is like bikes, rowers, things of that nature. And then pool workouts, if you have access to that. Again, in the high-level realms, that might be a possibility, right? Then we got our maintenance. So that's the maintain adaptation, right? It's kind of like one of those where it's like, we're not going to go crazy hard in the paint here. And it's going to be in place of heavier days when the calendar's tight, right? So we'll probably, if the calendar's tight, we're going to have maintenance days rather than development days. But here, what do we get? Concentric focus. So think about eccentric means that negative portion, right? If I'm doing a squat on the way down, that's an eccentric, right? If I'm doing an RD on the way down, that's eccentric. So we're gonna use exercises where there's not as much of the eccentric, because that's the stuff that gets you sore, makes you sore, but we're gonna have concentric focus. So think a sled or a prowler, right? I can push a heavy sled and I'm only pushing forward, right? So it's just a concentric focus, but I can still create a pretty good stimulus here. Step ups are another one, right? We can work on asymmetries. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But single leg movements, but a step up, when I'm stepping up, there's not as much of that eccentric load coming down. Lighter deadlifts, trap bar deadlift, obviously much better option in the basketball world, but not only lighter deadlifts, but also with the deadlift, I can actually lift it up and then drop it, or lift it up and do a control drop, right? Where I'm dropping it down, really not using that eccentric motion. And then just things that won't make them sore, right? Again, you can put whether that might just be reducing the volume, still using some exercises that have time under tension, but that they're just not gonna be really sore after, right? So that's kind of our maintenance. Now, loading development, that's like our go days, right? That's where we actually wanna, in between games, game days, or even, by the way, lifting on game days is not as smart. That's why you'll see in the NBA a lot of times, after the game, you'll see teams go into the weight room and get 20 minutes, 15, 25 minutes of strength training. Again, it will be categorized by minutes, right? The guys that were playing a lot, they're really gonna get some feel-good movement in, but you're gonna get the development guys, they're gonna go hard in the paint. Hard isometrics, they might go heavy deadlifts for, just concentric part of it, and kind of microdose it, right? But that's in between games, game days, or day after the game, right? So whatever the athlete sees value in and needs to work on, we categorized it and said, hey, again, that might be squat, bench, it might be split squats, it might be a lot of different things. Some things you won't see as much of is that explosive, bouncy stuff, because they're getting so much of that in games in season, right? But development days, we're getting after it. Now, those sessions still, in off season, that session might be an hour 15 long or an hour 20. And in season, you might be looking at 30 minutes, 25 minutes. Maybe there's times where you can do 40 minutes, right? But again, we are getting after it and challenging ourselves to, again, keep that nervous system, that strength up, and maintain that muscle. So, and then from neuro prep, this is usually faster paced sessions that stimulate the nervous system. We'd always do this the day before the game. They feel really, really good. So we're focusing on explosive activities that make them feel good. The athletes feel bouncy. They're feeling explosive. It's good for confidence as well. So jumps, med ball throws, prowler sled throws, Olympic pulls, half kneeling core work, things, again, not gonna beat you up as much, things like that of that nature. Again, they're leaving feeling and by the way, even on maintenance days, the athletes, they should feel better when they walked in. They should not feel extremely tired and beat up, right? On development days, if they're fatigued, that's fine. Okay, but not on maintenance days. On the neural prep stimulus days, they're just feeling like they could, rip stuff apart, go on the field right now and be explosive and do stuff. So that's kind of our 4 categories. And then what we do, we look at the big picture. And by the way, there's a couple of people I want you guys to follow here. There's a great book, also a course called The Quadrant System by Daniel Bowlby, who's the kind of head of performance for the Pelicans and NBA. You got the head strength coach of the Detroit Pistons, Schlesinger, has a microdosing a course as well that's excellent. And I mentioned my friend Mike Robertson, iFast Basketball Insight is excellent. If you really want to dive deep into, I would say basketball performance training, all excellent resources. But that brings me, because this is kind of where we're looking at this and some of the places that I've got different insights on it. But we want to look at, are there planned breaks? Where, for example, in high school, you have some planned breaks during, whether it's, that Christmas time or specific holidays or spring breaks or whatever it may be, where you're not going to have games. And what you do there, you're going to probably end up adding more of those development sessions and get opportunity, to go harder in those weeks when it comes to strength training, right? Where the schedule tight and condensed, you're going to have some times where you have, maybe 2 games and then you have a tournament, right? And again, some teams that I've worked with chose to do tournaments in off time, right? So they'd go and play 2, 3, 4 games in a short period of time. Okay, well, that might be a condensed schedule. And then we're going to see, we might not be able to do as much strength training in those phases as we can. So, where can we have more focus in the weight room? And that's why we work backwards. We zoom out, we look at the big picture, we look at the calendar, and we go like, okay, cool, we got opportunities here to get, 3-4 strength training sessions in 2 weeks where we develop, because we're gonna have weeks later where we can't do any of that, right? So what's the overall rhythm of the season? We wanna look at that, right? Again, I know teams that have chosen to, and as a strength coach, sometimes you don't have, I would say, a decision over that, right? Where the team says, hey, listen, we have some off time here, but we want the guys to go here, we're gonna go to another state and play tournaments. And, there's benefits to that, obviously, but that means that you're gonna have to pull back on certain styles of training, right? And then just consolidating stress. Again, consolidating stress, meaning you have to look at the big picture of, travel is stress, right? So it's not only are there away games, how far are they traveling, and then how is that gonna affect your sessions, right? You gotta look at all of those things. Okay, which brings me to, all right. Well, we took it for a ride. In season versus off season, just in general, what are some things that we want to look at? Well, first of all, and by the way, you want to dive into, I've done a bunch of videos on R7, which is the system that I use, that I learned from Mike Robertson and Bill Hartman, right? Where the different R's are basically based on a training session. We have R1 is our released, our soft tissue work. R2 is our resets. Maybe our breathing resets. R3 is readiness. That's our dynamic warm-up. R4 is reactive. So that's our explosive work, right? Whether that might be throws, jumps, sprints, again, rate of force development stuff, Olympic lifts. And then R5 is resilience. So that's our strength training, right? And then R6 is our R5 is resistance, which is strength training. R6 is resilience, which is our conditioning. So when we look at in-season versus off-season, we're really going to decrease, minimize, almost sometimes maybe eliminate R4, right? I mean, because think about it, jump, sprint, stops. I mean, they're doing all of that on the court, whether it's practice or it's games, right? They got tons of sprint, start, finish, agility, jumping, plenty of it. And I'll show you what you can put in place of that will actually help with some of the, seen a lot of high school kids that start getting their knees flared up, right? Patellar tendonitis and things of that nature. And what you would put in place of R4 that can be really beneficial sometimes. We're gonna reduce volume in R5, right? Meaning, so our resistance training, our volume will be much lower in season than it is in off season. And we're gonna shift exercise selection in high minute players, right? So again, what might that look like? No bar in the back. You've probably seen videos of different NBA players that are doing, belt squats, and they'll go pretty hard and heavy on the belt squats, but the weight is here. Right, it's almost tractioning the hips, feels better. You can still load the legs up heavy, but we have no direct kind of axial loading, right? Or again, shifting to the front, maybe doing a front squat. Again, I love the pendulum squat. And there's just a lot of different options, but we're gonna shift exercise selection here, again, in high minute players and what they're going to be doing, right? When a decreased total time in the weight room, I shared that example of where sometimes you might see 20-minute strength sessions. But guess what? In 20 minutes, we might be able to get 3 exercises for 2 good sets each. So 6 total sets. But you know what? If we load them up pretty good, again, this is back to that micro dosing that I was talking about. That might be a great 20 minutes. And it adds up. Again, it adds up throughout the season. We can maintain. Remember, the goal is to maintain for most people and have the minimal amount of loss of strength, muscle mass, and again, taking care of the tendons as well, right? So, and again, we have to have a plan, but we don't want to be a slave to the plan. So, some of example is just plenty of times where it was overtime games, right? So now the game gets extended. Some of the guys are playing really long minutes, right? Or it might be travel, right? Travel, multiple games over multiple days. And you had something planned and something went a little bit off, right? Nagging injuries, things of that nature, you're gonna have to start changing your plan. So this is an example of, again, when I was working with Bellevue High School, we had usually I would say Tuesday, Friday games, but this will be an example of a 4-week schedule, right? So we kind of want to work backwards. We want to plan the games first, right? So you outline when the games are. You want to plan recovery days after that. Then time off when you can load more, and then a condensed schedule back off. So for example, okay, we got a Tuesday. So let's look at the week that has a Tuesday game and it has a Friday game here. right? First, remember, we go recovery, right? We plan recovery after the games. So we're gonna do a stim session before this game. Honestly, we'd probably do a stim session before this game as well, if possible, right here, right? So we got 2 stims and 2 recoveries on that week. Now, next week, there was a Friday, Saturday game, right? So we got Friday, Saturday game. They got 2 games. We're definitely giving them a game, I would say a day off here, right? So they get an off day on Sunday. But guess what? Because this is far off now, bro. So we have Saturday. This is probably gonna be off day for them, loading. So this is gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard and heavy, right? So it's gonna be the development day. But that week, because we don't have that game, guess what we can do now? We can do a loading, and then we can do a maintenance, right? And then obviously you can notice that always before the game, we have stim sessions. The following week is only 1 game. Same thing, like those are opportunities for us, right? So again, on that Monday, we load. Wednesday, we do maintenance, so lower volume here. We stimulate, we got a game, recovery, that's probably off day for them. And then the next week, again, we got 2 games, so we're gonna have 2 stims, recovery. I missed the recovery right here, right? But you can kind of see that schedule. It's like we have some opportunities here, so we get 2 loading sessions, 2 maintenance sessions in those 2 weeks where there's either 2 games back to back or just 1 game, right? But we're gonna work backwards because now look, is this ideal? But this will be enough to be able to maintain that strength. And again, those players that are not getting as many minutes, by the way, those players that are not getting as many minutes on these Mondays and stim days, those might be like maintenance days for those guys, right? Whereas like your high minute players, they're gonna stick to that schedule as we see it. Now, regardless of how you would do this is how you would map it out. You start with a schedule, and again, if you saw tournaments, travel, all things of that nature, that's how you map it out and kind of work backwards, right? And I wanted to finish off here with giving just some examples of what things look like, okay? So if we're doing a recovery session, R1 to R3 is longer. So remember, R1 to R3 is our soft tissue work, right? Our foam rolling, lacrosse balls, things of that nature, our breathing resets, dynamic warm-ups. So now I might spend 20 minutes here, okay? Right, because they're gonna feel good after that. For R4, so Spanish squats, so think about Spanish squats are when I would loop a strong band around a rig, then I would sit back, okay, and I would just hold 30, 45 seconds, or like leg extensions, right? Like a heavy leg extension, single leg ones, where you're holding it around here, like really, really heavy loaded. Jake Tura talks about that, but what that does, they're isometrics, they're pretty analgesic towards tendons, right? They're great for tendons. If the tendons are bugging you, we'll plug this in. So it's not jumps, but it's actually helping you with kind of reduce that, I would say, what you're feeling in your knees, right? And then we'll have a strength circuit here for 3 to 5 rounds. So a backward sled drag, push up to downward dog, right? So we're opening up hamstrings, getting some thoracic mobility also, bike, half kneeling pull downs. Just because we're in a half kneeling position, what can we do, right? That hip separation during the in season, right? Stuff gets tight. So the more that we can work stuff, obviously this needs to be on the ground, right? We'll do pull down and then banded leg lowering, right? So imagine you're on the ground. This is a straight leg. You're pulling that leg with a band to get a hamstring stretch. The other one is controlling down. So we get some core in there as well. And this would feel great afterwards, right? Like you're not gonna be beat up, you're not gonna be sore. That would be an example of a recovery session. Maintenance session, we do our, warm-up standard, right? We take our 12, 15 minutes to get warmed up. R4 is similar, right? We either do the Spanish squats, the leg extension isos, or you do something like different med-ball throw variations, scoop tosses, step and throws. We could do a lot of different variations, 2 to 3 sets of 5 box jumps, right? Not as much. Again, box jump is less load because we're jumping up, but we don't have a lot of kind of a deceleration as we would with the regular squat jumps, 2 to 3 sets of 5, right? Just feeling good, feeling explosive. And then we do concentric focus stuff like trap bar deadlifts for 4 to 6 reps. Again, decently heavy, but we're not going crazy here, right? We're leaving reps in the tank. And by the way, we could do that deadlift where we just drop it, right? So it's purely concentric. Push-up variation, step-ups 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 10. Again, things that we can work on asymmetries, right? There's something I didn't post in here, but like There's sessions where it will work a lot on asymmetries, meaning if somebody is very biased towards one leg, there's what's that strap is a great, if you look up what's that strap, it's like this orange band that I would slip into and then basically turn around. So imagine it's pulling me in one direction, right? If I wanted to bias sitting into one hip a little bit more, right? Or it would try to rotate me in one way, so I'd have to use more internal rotation. You could do, by the way, that what's that strap, you could do with a sled, right? It would turn around. I'm pushing this sled back, but it's basically pulling me into this direction, right? So I can work on the asymmetry. Same thing if I'm doing different offset positions of a kettlebell here, right? So I can get more internal rotation on this hip. So single leg stuff in general in season is gonna be important, right? Same thing, you got, this is half kneeling cable row, right? Again, we're in that split squat position, maybe even doing thorax rows so we can maintain that thoracic rotation. 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 10, 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 10. And then isometric lower body. Maybe that's like leg extensions. Again, maybe that's isometric. Maybe it's hamstring curls. But we would also know, like maybe it's calf raises, and then core. Again, this is like question mark because it depends what the person needs to work on. We also want to make sure that none of this stuff is going to like really make them too sore, right? Especially on the maintenance sessions, right? But that would be an example of that. And again, this should be, this is like 40 minutes maybe. And it could be less depending on team travel, facilities, all of that stuff, right? Then we got development example. Same thing, we got R1 to R3 standard, R4 same as the main, right? So if we look at that R4 here, the throws, the jumps, or the Spanish squats or the leg extensions, but then we're gonna lift, right? Like we're gonna get after it. So here might be something like a pendulum squat, double kettlebell squat, 2 to 3 sets of 6 to 8. And we'd load that pretty damn heavy, right? Like this would be a challenging set. We might do a landmine push press, right? So I'm here getting some of that reach in that shoulder blade, again, but still creating some rate of force development. From there, we do front foot elevated, low cable split squat. So imagine this foot is elevated, right? This back leg is on a pad on a split squat, and I'm gonna go, that weight's pulling me forward, so I have to sit back into it. Again, we're also in season, remember, we're addressing movement, right? So if players are living here, right, and we want to make sure that we kind of get them back into space, that's why we're using variations like the low cable split squat with the front foot elevated. Half kneeling lat pull down, again, half kneeling positions. Here we might get some rotation as well. The difference is that on a day like this, we're gonna load the hell out of this, right? We're gonna go hard on it, and then we're gonna control volume. Just like we said, hey, if it's a high minute player, that's gonna look different as a development player, right? Development player is gonna get 3 sets of this, right? 3 sets of everything. They're gonna push the hell out of it. A high minute player, may skip some of these things depending on how they're feeling, or they might get a couple of sets of some of these exercises. And then, for instance, face pull here and a core exercise at the bottom, right? And number 4, stim session, we'd go R1 to R3, we'd go standard. R4, we'd go similar, but I'd also add some things like fast feet, like think a low box and we're stepping on and off the box, 6 to 8 seconds, foot fire as fast as possible, doing some lighter dumbbell snatches. And from there, we'd go like belt squat, but again, two times 6 to 8 reps, not as heavy, but fast, right? So on the way up, we're moving fast, and we're gonna do band assisted jumps. So imagine I'm grabbing onto a band and I'm jumping, right? And the band's pulling me up. So I'm having less contact on the ground. We do that for 2 sets of 5, 6 reps. Then we do staggered cable press. For example, we could be here and just do it one-sided. We could do doubles for 8 reps. Split squat jumps, which is basically our lunge jumps as high as possible. 2 to 3 sets of 5, and then end on some core, right? They're leaving this feeling explosive, like they could have done a ton of more work, right? But again, we've really got that nervous system going, okay? Again, one of the things that like I mentioned, but I didn't plug in here is the asymmetry part, right? If somebody was asymmetrical, instead of doing that double, we wanted to really bang out some asymmetries, instead of that double kettlebell squat, we might do an offset squat, right? Just on one side, because again, depending on the sport, in season, a lot of these players really start shifting to like one side and biasing things. So we would like, we want to do our best to keep them, from veering too far off. And so now this is going to kind of go on an individual basis, obviously, whether you're starting to plug in more asymmetrical things. But for a lot of players, I would plug this in almost, again, if you have larger teams, high school teams, and you can't individualize as much, I'm actually doing quite a bit of that in season, because everybody's going to need it. It's going to help everybody out, right? So this is kind of hopefully just giving you a little bit of an overview and a thought process around in-season training, going a little bit kind of deeper on for the high school, but in general, zooming out 10,000 foot view and then working backwards on how you're going to plan out the season. So I hope that this helps. But if you have more questions, drop them in the comments, or obviously reach out to me, because I create content for you guys and to give you insights, wisdom, and again, things that you can actually do, take and apply. And like I said, shout out to my guy, Mike Robertson, and check out, if you're really, really, really into the basketball performance side of things, check out iFast Insider, Basketball Insider. Look that up. He's got tons of this. And if you want more things like this, okay, more content like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next episode of Coach's Corner.